Hi, welcome to Ladies of Another View on Beck, and it's a Monday morning, I think, right?
And or afternoon is the case with you.
Afternoon. I was wrong. It's not the morning. So I'm here with Emily and Carmen, and many of you may know Dan, the tree man, Cashman from Cashman Nursery. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
Oh, you bet, Patty. Thank you for having me.
And Mary's going to join us later in the show, but you're in her seat right now.
Oh,
so
good.
I'm really excited to have you on because Friday is Arbor Day.
Yes.
In Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, in North Dakota, because it goes state by state, right? You want to tell us about Arbor Day?
Yeah, it's a day set aside to, remember and think about trees and planting trees and the value of trees and what they do. Clean the air, give us shade in the summer, let the sun in the winter, stop the wind a little bit or block it like in windbreaks or shelter belts. So it was 150 years ago. In 1872, in Nebraska, J. Sterling Morton, he's the guy that thought it up because he loved trees. Nebraska had their Arbor Day last Friday. Usually it's either the last Friday of the month or in North Dakota happens to be the first Friday, which will be the 6th this Friday. But it's, I call it my feast day. But I think every day is Arbor Day. Every day is Arbor Day.
Well, when you go by Dan the Tree Man, yeah, that's going to definitely. And I wanted to make it interesting for everybody. We're going to just talk a little bit about trees and lawns and the whole nursery business. Later on in the show, we're going to get into some more serious topics. I should let people know we're going to talk about Fufeng and also this ministry of truth that the government has decided we need. We might think otherwise. You'll have to wait and see. Yeah. But Dan, I wanted to start out with talking about trees in union with Arbor Day. Because in North Dakota, we've got a number of different things. We don't have the same growing season they do everywhere else. Plus, we had a 3-day blizzard this year. How is that going to affect the growing season?
Well, it was tough, especially on the ranchers, but we are very appreciative of the moisture. And the northern and western parts got great moisture. I think Bismarck area got about 2.5 inches out of that big storm around Easter. Well, one thing that happened with the storm is upright evergreens like arborvitaes and upright junipers that are, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom, kind of shaped like an ice cream cone upside down. They might have gotten their shape thrown off. It was a wet snow. It was a heavy snow. There was a lot of water in it. So I did mention to people on our website, cashman-nursery.com and things like that, to bat the trees with a broom or shake that wet stuff off because some of them got bent so far they bent all the way over and then might not kill them, although they could break off, but you could shake it off and then maybe tie them back together. And a lot of people don't trim their trees like that very often because they figure they're going to grow anyway. But you can, if the shape got disturbed or hurt or ruined a little bit because of all that wet snow, you might have to tie some, some of them have multiple trunks, and then maybe trim them lightly to make them fill in a little more. The whole growing season is ahead of us. So if you want to trim, this is a good time, except things that bloom in the spring, like lilacs. I'd say enjoy the bloom because they're going to bloom in about 2 or 3 weeks, towards the end of May, middle of May, end of May. And then after they're done blooming, if you want to trim them for size and shape, trim them then. You can trim them now, but all the flower buds on most of the shrubs are out on the ends of the branches. And then if you trim them now, you probably won't have many flowers. But the arborvitaes and the evergreens you can trim. No.
So yeah, if there's no blossoms, go ahead and trim your trees. Yep. But if they're flowering, let's enjoy the flowers first.
Exactly.
And the whole idea with Arbor Day was to plant a tree.
Yep.
And so here are some trees. You mentioned a few trees that we might like to plant, right?
Yes.
So what do we have first? What is this?
I think that's Amur maple, A-M-U-R. The Amur River is in eastern Siberia. Haven't been there. I'm not going, especially in January. But I know it's a tough climate. It's like a zone 1 and zone 2. And back in the 1880s and 1890s, a professor from Brookings, South Dakota, used to be, now it's South Dakota State University, but they called him the Great Plant Wizard. And he took the train all the way to New York, took a sailing ship to Europe, and took the train all the way around across Siberia and Russia, 11 time zones. Russia's a vast country. And he collected seeds from eastern Siberia, and he's the one that introduced Amur maple. So it's a very hardy maple. If you drive across the river in Bismarck to Mandan, in October or in September, you'll see all those trees turning orange and red. That's amber maple. There's thousands or hundreds, well, there's probably 1,000 there. And they turn orange and red in the fall. They only get about 30 feet high or 32, 33 feet high. But he also introduced Siberian arborvitae, Siberian elm, Nanking cherry, cotoneaster, all these plants that we use. And we probably would have had them sooner or later, but he brought them over here, and he made 3 trips to Russia. I think he spent a lot of his time traveling. His name was Professor N.E. Hansen. If you want to Google it, look him up. It's fascinating.
Okay.
You know.
So what's the lifespan of?
Oh, I'm sure 80, 100 years
Is it?
on something like
Okay.
this. Yep.
Oh yeah, we don't have to worry about it in our lifetime. What I like about it is the bright red color, because when you go out east, you get the richer
and
colors.
spring color too. Some plants are going to be blooming soon, like the flowering crabs. And the flowering crabs that they have now have fruit on it that don't fall off. There is one variety, spring snow, which is white, and it doesn't have any fruit. It's seedless. But I like to feed the birds and the squirrels too, but they're beautiful. But there's some prairie fire, which is a red flowering crab, and red splendor, which is reddish pink. And they have fruit on it that attract the birds and squirrels. And the fruit isn't a mess.
So just to let you know, we have 3 minutes late.
That's prairie fire
There's
right
a
there.
prairie fire. Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah.
And they're hardy here.
You had recommended an elm tree, the St. Croix American elm.
Yep, that's the lone survivor of maybe close to 1,000 elms near the St. Croix River, east of St. Paul, and just before you go across the bridge to Hudson, Wisconsin. And there's also a lone survivor northeast of Carrington called Discovery Elm, and maybe they've introduced a couple different ones. NDSU was helpful in developing, and basically it's survivors of American elms that have never gotten the disease, or they can ward off the disease and keep it from spreading. And it used to be a bad thing to say the word elm out loud, but not anymore, because
Here we go, Dutch elm disease.
Yep.
Because a lot of people may not be aware that Dutch elm disease has killed off most of the elm trees in
in
this
Ohio,
country.
Indiana, Illinois, everywhere.
And what causes it? Is it a, what
Well,
is
it was
as?
an insect brought over from Europe. I think somebody brought some trees over a long time ago, maybe in the early 1900s. But these elms are not the future. They're now. And there's a lot of cathedral elms, which is one of the new ones, over by the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit here, just north of the Dairy Queen, when they widen Washington. There's a lot of good elms, and they grow fast, and they're clean, and they're resistant to the disease.
Is there a way to prevent the disease, or it's just?
You can spray, and the city of Bismarck's been really good. The city forestry department's been wonderful about trying to control it over the years, but it tends to follow the river, like up to Minot, and it had a lot of big problems there years ago. But you can spray, but if you get if you want to plant elms, just get one that's resistant. But if you've got one, you might have to spray. But not too often. We haven't seen a lot of it lately, but it's a problem, but not on the new ones.
Tell me, where's your store? I know you have a little rhyme that goes with it.
We're at 3400 East Main Avenue in Bismarck. That's just a half a mile east of the Big Buy, or a half a mile east of the Little Cottage Cafe, 2 of my favorite places. And the penitentiary happens to be across the street from us. And it used to be called Highway 10. That's why I say we're east on 10, north of the Penn, Bismarck.
Right,
But it's
okay.
3400 East Main.
And your website is?
Cashman-nursery.com.
All right, well, let's talk about lawns. Because most people have them, if you have a house. They can be controversial because not everybody wants to kill the weeds.
Yep.
So what do you see around town? First, let's talk about how hard it is to get a healthy lawn. What do you have to do?
How hard it is to get a
What
nice
do you
lawn?
have to do to get a healthy lawn?
A healthy lawn? Well, I always say you gotta weed it, you gotta feed it, and you gotta water it. Now, the watering has been a problem. The last 2 years, we've only had about 7 inches of rain, last year and the year before. And the water rates went up. And some people didn't water as much in 20 and 21. And a lot of it died out, especially lawns that face the south, or slope to the south, or face, like that, or face to the west.
So, Dan, is that from not watering a lawn when it looks like that?
Probably. It could have been the 2 tough summers we had back to back. Now, we had a fairly open winter this year. So we went in dry last fall, into the winter. And it's a good idea to water in October. And just, this is where the skies are not cloudy all day. That's the way the song goes. And so, but, if you think a water bill is expensive, if you have to redo your lawn, sometimes you can overseed right into the dead stubble. But if you have to take it all out and seed it, and you know, it's easier to keep it going. But I do think, you know, people love to have the nicest yard in town, but some just kind of let it go. And a lot of
Okay.
it was the weather.
Here's a nice lawn, right?
Yep, very nice, yep. So, you know, but a lot of people, you know, are not fond of weeds either. So they say it's not enough to just love flowers and lawn. You also have to dislike weeds.
So is there a specific grass seed or grass type that will grow better in North Dakota, or?
Yes, the typical yard in Bismarck, Mandan is mainly Kentucky bluegrass. It's not pure Kentucky blue, but you should have a blend, maybe 65, 70% Kentucky bluegrass, and then maybe some perennial rye, which is narrow-bladed, and perennial fescus that root deep, and they are tough for wear. But if you're out in the country or you have a big backyard and you don't want a big water bill, a lot of people will use what we call low maintenance or a rural mix, which might not have any Kentucky blue in it, or maybe only 20% or so, and then have some deep rooting, narrow bladed wheat grasses and native grasses that will root 2, 3, 4 feet down. And that way, when we get into a dry part of the year, it won't die. And when it does rain, it'll green up and look more like a sodded lawn. But if you, you know, if you don't want a big water bill and you don't have to fertilize it much, you could use a low maintenance lawn. Like if we do a Walmart or a Holiday Inn or a big piece of property and there's acres, around the building we might sod it or use seed that's like sod, mainly bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass. And then if it's out around their parking lot and all those islands, and they don't want to mow it much and they don't want to water it much, they'll use a low maintenance. And that's real practical. And it looks just as good. It does.
So what if you have dandelions? I mean, hardly anybody does around here, right? But if you do and you want to get rid of them, what's
Yeah.
the best way to go about that?
Well, step one on the fertilizer, now fertilizers are very handy, and NDSU says you should fertilize at least 2 or 3 times a year, but a lot of people do 4 steps. The second step would be the post-emergent killer, and that's dandelions. They're there now. If you went out in January and scraped the snow back, you could find the dandelions. They're perennial. But the early weeds haven't come yet, and they come from cedar beer. They're annuals, and like crabgrass. So step one has a pre-emergent, it blocks those seeds from germinating and growing for like 120 days. That's May, June, July, August. So you're pretty good all summer. But then let's say they aren't here yet. They'll germinate when the soil warms up, which will be around Mother's Day, or maybe that's, you know, this weekend or a week later. So, but then let's say around the 3rd week of May or so, then the dandelions come up and all these other ones that are broadleaf. Broadleaf means maybe they're as wide, these weeds are as wide as your fingernails, and not skinny and narrow like thread or like lawn is. Okay, so then you could use the post-emergent and kill it and feed the lawn at the same time, or you can just get a liquid and you can spray it, or you can hire somebody to spray it. And then the third one would be in the middle of summer. The lawns are still hungry, we're watering a lot, we're leaching, and you can use a lower nitrogen fertilizer, and that's step 3. And then step 4 is in August or September. You want the roots to go deep, you want the lawn to stay healthy to the end of the growing season, and that's step 4. And it doesn't have weed killers in it, but it usually is good to bring your lawn through healthy.
So you're all about healthy lawns. I don't know if you are feel good about dandelions or not, because a lot of people, they're healthy. You can use them in salads. They're supposed to be a great food.
I'm not a purist when it comes to a lawn. Now, my wife does not like weeds, and she'll go around and she'll even, with a paintbrush, get the quack grass and all that. And I tell her, with 6 children, you must need a hobby, Carol, because, but we have a nice lawn, thanks to her. If the weeds are green and if the grass is green, I'm happy. I'm not too fussy on the lawns.
Right.
I'm more worried about the bushes and the trees.
Well, let's talk about the nursery business in general, because you were mentioning before the show about Christmas trees, that a lot of people are aging out and retiring. And what's happening in the nursery business? Is there a new generation coming up?
There is, and there's more people into maintenance of yards than there used to be. But there's quite a few younger ones. I'm 3rd generation. My son will be taking over. I can't do this forever. I'd like to, but I know it's my limitations. But so he'll be 4th generation, and a lot of nurseries though are like farmers. They go from generation to generation, and there's new ones a lot, and but there aren't a lot of big growers here because this is not a real rainy area. Like there's big nurseries out west on the west coast, and there's big nurseries where there's big populations like Minneapolis, St. Paul, things like that. But I think there always will be plenty of nurseries doing that, and there's a lot of people into hardscaping, building walls, patios, things like that. That's growing a lot, and
So what does somebody have to do if they want to get into it? You know, like if do they have to go to college, or can they just jump in and start working with the nursery?
It helps. Yeah, I guess I was just, you know, because my father did it and his father did it before him, you know, in the 1890s. But I took horticulture at the University of Minnesota, and I majored in that and in business. But anyway, it's seasonal, that's for sure. When we're busy, we're busy. In the wintertime, of course, you can't dig any holes, so it's not so busy then. But there's always something to do. There's always something to do. The biggest problem always has been, and especially is now, is having enough good help, because it is seasonal and you need them. And then you don't really need them in the winter. And what do you do with them in the wintertime? And you hope that they can make it through the winter. But
so that's that's a whole nother topic, having enough help. We've talked about it. We will continue to talk about, where is everybody?
I know.
And that we need workers. So thank you, Dan, for joining us today.
Well, it was fun.
It's always fun.
It was great.
It was fun.
It was great.
So if you need any advice on trees, lawn, anything that grows, go to Dan Cashman, right? Cashman Nursery.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a great staff too.